A thread by Stu Swerk. Election Chronicles. Lest we forget, the United States Department of State fingered the Wuhan Virology Lab back in 2018. The Chi-Com's well-orchestrated Twitter campaign to push a worldwide lockdown was summarized in this thread. And I'm going to go ahead and go to this thread from MPS, Michael P. Sanger. This New York Times article by Paul Moser is a smoking gun on the genesis of the coronavirus lockdowns. According to the article, the Chinese Communist Party launched a massive social media campaign in Italy to advertise its coronavirus lockdown measures in early March. From the New York Times, behind China's Twitter campaign, a murky supporting chorus. The fact that the Chinese Communist Party's disinformation campaign focused on Italy is crucial. Italy was the first country outside China to lock down. The rest of the world followed Italy's lead. But the Chinese Communist Party's campaign wasn't limited to Italy. The article states that this tweet advertising China's lockdown policy to the world is fake. It has 142,000 likes. Tweets like this prove CCP was actively selling the world on Wuhan-style lockdowns in early March. Next, if you do a search for the URL of that fake tweet, you'll find it tweeted by many accounts around the world. Each account is suspicious. They tweet incessantly about COVID until Floyd's death, and then solely about Black Lives Matter. The sheer scale of this operation and the number of accounts involved and its influence around the world is really remarkable. Thousands of accounts tweeting incessantly about COVID hysteria, then pivoting to incessant Black Lives Matter and anti-police propaganda in every country. The day after Paul Moser's New York Times article was published, Twitter suspended over 170,000 fake Chinese accounts. But none of the fake accounts involved in the ring described above were suspended. The problem is much larger than Twitter acknowledges. New York Times, Twitter removes Chinese disinformation campaign. More than 50 National Institutes of Health scientists fired due to China ties. Hundreds more under investigation. By co-opting scientists and academics while aggressively promoting lockdowns through social media propaganda, China made lockdown pseudoscience seem sound. From sciencemag.org, 54 scientists have lost their jobs as a result of NIH. Though the Chinese Communist Party's influence operations in media, politics, and academia were surreptitious, its stance in support of global adoption of COVID lockdowns was explicit. Here is China's foreign spokesperson promoting strict social distancing among children. I am not happy. I can't go to school. I can't see my friends. I can't go to my favorite restaurant. I can't go to parties. I can't go to Disneyland. Let's wait for. I know all these sacrifices will be worth it. I have stayed at home for 2 months already. I wear my mask. I wash my hands. I don't go to crowded areas in order to stop the virus spreading. This is Chinese propaganda. Because I know if I don't do so, I might be affected and infect my dad, my mom, and my brother. If they are sick, they might die, and I won't see them anymore. I will be even more upset. This is the little 7. Coronavirus is a global health emergency. For those of you just listening, it's just a little Chinese girl. Everyone on this earth has a responsibility to stop it. It should not be a political matter to be used against other nations. Irony. I am only 7 years old. I understand it, but why do some adults not get it? To those national leaders, stop blaming each other. Forget about your own interests. The virus won't go away by winning a political argument. We should use our strength, power, determination, and courage all together to fight this common enemy, coronavirus. All right, I've had enough. In speech this morning at the Hudson Institute, FBI Director Christopher Wray says the Chinese Communist Party approached local politicians to endorse its COVID lockdowns. Quote, in fact, we have heard from federal, state, and even local officials that Chinese diplomats are aggressively urging support for China's handling of the COVID-19 crisis. Yes, this is happening at both the federal and state levels. This collage is a tiny sample of the fake accounts the Chinese Communist Party used to popularize COVID lockdowns. In these tweets, the Chinese Communist Party sends its regards to the world by denigrating every other government in the world, using many dialects and contrasting them with its authoritarian success. These tweets were easily identified using leads in Paul Moser's New York Times article. Here, hundreds of fake accounts whine about washing their hands while China locks down. Nearly identical tweets are made in many languages, fake Spanish tweets. Twitter responded the following day by saying they'd removed 170,000 accounts in this campaign. But Twitter lied. These fake CCP accounts and presumably hundreds of thousands of others are still doing the Chinese Communist Party's bidding. Fake French tweets. In cooperation with the FBI, the National Science Foundation reports between 14 and 18 cases of undisclosed China financial ties. This is in addition to the 175 cases of undisclosed China financial ties earlier reported by the National Institutes of Health, a much larger organization. Sweden, from the Nature article, Sweden, partly due to its own COVID-19 response, has been a prime target of a Chinese campaign portraying Western democracies as weak against the threat. Sweden is one of the few countries that ordered no lockdown and put its faith in herd immunity. The fall that shut down the world. This video of a Wuhan man falling dead from COVID went viral in January. Farcical in hindsight. In a CCP interview, editor-in-chief of Lancet praises the Chinese Communist Party's lockdowns. From globaltimes.cn, China shows the world the right way for pandemic response. Quote from the article, not only the right thing to do, but it also showed other countries how they should respond in the face of such an acute threat. So I think we have a great deal to thank China for. The WHO was instrumental in pushing world leaders to adopt China's lockdowns and insisting lockdowns not be lifted until strict tracing criteria were met. Bruce Aylward is the same WHO leader who disconnected a live interview when asked about Taiwan. South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem famously refused to issue a state lockdown. Her decision didn't sit well with Beijing. The Chinese Communist Party's army of fake accounts began filling her Twitter feed with abuse to punish her disobedience and pressure her to shut down her state. By contrast, the accounts heap praise on governors who tightened lockdowns, like Dan Andrews, governor of Victoria, Australia. Andrews' longtime staffer attended a high-level CCP academy. An MP leading Andrews' Belt and Road negotiations with Beijing lauded China's handling of COVID. All right, so there's that thread. Stu Swerk continues. It is no coincidence that the Dementiacrat Democrat Party swallowed the lockdown storyline, hook, line, and sinker, because it suits their primary objective, which is to defeat Donald Trump in November at any cost. Did they coordinate with the Chi-Coms? Anything is possible this year. In January 2018, the American Embassy in Beijing released the below cable on China opening the first biosafety level 4 laboratory at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. Okay, so there's page 1, page 2, and page 3. The print's too small for me to read. Note, The redactions under Section B5 and B6 are Exemption 5 of the FOIA, the FOIA protects interagency or intra-agency memorandums or letters which would not be available by law to a party other than an agency in litigation with the agency. The courts have construed this somewhat opaque language with its sometimes confusing threshold requirement to exempt those documents and only those documents that are normally privileged in the civil discovery context. Although originally it was not clear that Exemption 5 was intended to incorporate every privilege known to civil discovery, the Supreme Court subsequently made it clear that the coverage of Exemption 5 is quite broad, encompassing both statutory privileges and those commonly recognized by case law, and that it is not limited to those privileges explicitly mentioned in its legislative history. Exemption 6 permits the government to withhold all information about individuals in, quote, personnel and medical files and similar files when the disclosure of such information, quote, would constitute a clearly unwarranted invasion of personal privacy, end quote. One can speculate that the IC intelligence community has been focused like a laser beam on the goings-on at the lab ever since. A, quote, shortage of highly trained technicians and investigators was identified in the first paragraph of the cable. Is it any wonder that most credible and informed speculation, including from now restricted and deceased Chinese sources, indicates that the lab was the source of the virus? And the Chi-Coms booted Western journalists from Hubei province and Wuhan when their questions got too hot, while stonewalling the rest of the world on virus-related info, as well as using paid stooges at the World Health Organization to misdirect, i.e., lie to, everyone. President Trump is absolutely correct to call it the China virus, as that is where patient 0 was located, and that biosafety level 4 lab was almost certainly involved. Some serious accountability and indemnification by the Chi-Coms is warranted and required. Rest assured, if the two Manchurian candidates, Biden and Harris, steal the November election, it will be swept under the rug as they kowtow to their masters in Beijing. Biden's past corruption with the Chi-Coms via his own son Hunter is known. I wonder how much Kamala Harris's husband and his company have gotten from the Chi-Coms over the years. She is following the pattern of San Fran Nan and Di-Fi, Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein, whose hubbies have made bank with the Chi-Coms over the years. Power and money, in this case, renminbi, I don't know what that means. These are the ties that bind. Makes me wonder whether the Chi-Coms are picking the Democrat candidates this year. I don't believe in coincidences. Some enterprising journalist needs to ask Biden, Harris about the Chi-Coms lockdown orchestration via Twitter, as described in the first tweet in this thread, and then watch their deer in the headlights looks. Bought and paid for they are.